Once upon a time, in a little mountain village, there was an old wooden church where the people went to pray. Just outside that church lived a family of field mice. It was a small little family as field mice go. Mother Mouse had only 5 pups. The first 4 pups were little girl mice, born on Christmas Eve during a very cold and snowy winter. They opened their eyes and ears, grew fur and long tails, and began to learn how to be mice. The last pup was a little boy mouse. Mother Mouse called him Chrismouse because he was born on Christmas Day. And he was oh so small. He didn't open his eyes for a whole month. He could hear by then, but he couldn't see very much at all. Mother Mouse worried about him quite a bit. But finally, Chrismouse opened his eyes one morning, and Mother Mouse's worried face turned soft with love for her little son. Chrismouse's sisters were hard workers. They helped Father Mouse carry the grain seeds into their burrow and hunted for scraps of food that the church pastor left outside in the garbage. They were very good at climbing up the garbage pail, diving down into the muck and mush, and coming up with an orange peel, a cold piece of potato, a rotten tomato half, or a crust of bread. But Chrismouse wasn't good at finding and carrying food. In fact, he didn't like to be outside at all in the cold. He asked Mother Mouse when it would warm up, and she told him to be patient. One day would unfold to the next, and the sun would soon shine and warm their fur. Oh, Chrismouse liked that idea. He painted a picture in his mind of the sun warming him while he slept in a bed of daffodils. Still, winter was cold and he was only a couple of months old. And one day, Chrismouse went through a hole left by a missing brick, which led to a hole in a wooden baseboard. He went in further and further and found himself face to face with 2 big yellow-green eyes. He stared at them, frozen to the spot. Then the eyes went away, and instead a large, furry grey paw entered the hole and moved around, searching for him. Chrismouse scurried outside, panting, unable to think of anything but this large grey paw coming for him. Yet, Chrismouse was also curious. He had not been blessed with strength and quickness, but he had a lot of curiosity. After a moment, he poked his head back into the hole. No paw. He moved gingerly towards the inside of the church and peeked out of the hole in the baseboard. Still no paw. What else is there in this place? He wondered. So Chrismouse decided to take a chance, and he bravely walked out of the hole, crawling ever so silently and slowly along the baseboard and into the shadow of the first pew of the church. Using all his energy, he climbed up to the bench and inspected his new surroundings. Okay, there didn't seem to be much there, so he scurried to the end of the pew and sat on top of a Bible. What is this? He decided to open the book. With all his might, he pushed open the cover and began turning page after page with his nose. And just then he saw them. Those yellow-green eyes were back, and they were looking at him. He didn't know what to do, so he pulled the prayers book cover on top of himself just as the paw struck down at him from the back of the pew. Chrismouse was terrified and thought, "Oh, I'm too young to die. I don't know anything about the world yet." The creature kept pawing at him, and suddenly its mouth came down on Christmas' tail, which didn't quite fit beneath the cover. The cat's jaws clamped shut. Chrismouse squeaked in pain. The creature had half of his tail in his mouth and was about to take another bite when the pastor of the church came to his rescue. "Hey, what's going on here?" he asked the walls of the church. There was no one to answer him. "Come on, Sally, be a good cat. Shoo, shoo!" And with that, the cat swished her tail and marched away. The pastor lifted the missile cover to see a shivering little Chrismouse bleeding from his tail. "Come, little one," the pastor said. "I think you need some first aid for that nasty bite Sally gave you." Poor little Chrismouse didn't understand any of the sounds the man made. He tried to move away from him, but the pastor had caught him. He held Chrismouse gently in his hands. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and wrapped it around Chrismouse's tail. "You are one of God's creatures after all," whispered the pastor to Chrismouse, "and I will do my best to help you. It isn't every day you find a mouse reading the gospel." The pastor, Hans Goodman, brought Chrismouse into the rectory, where he lived. It was part of the old church, just a simple room with a bed, a small stove and a wooden table and 2 chairs. Pastor Goodman held the mouse in one hand and he fumbled with the other one for his first aid kit. He found some salve and gently brushed Chrismouse's half tail with it, covering it with an old cotton napkin. He put Chrismouse down in a little box that had held a dozen of oranges one of his parishioners had given him. Chrismouse liked the scent of the box, and he went from one corner to the other, searching for the source of the smell. There must be food somewhere, he thought. That's the way mice think. And then the pastor put the cover on the box, but not before putting a pickle jar lid with water in it for Chrismouse to drink from. And even though his tail throbbed, he quickly fell asleep. Sally the cat had been watching all this from the corner of the room. Her plan was to finish the job and eat the rest of the Chrismouse when the pastor went to bed. Now, Sally wasn't bad. It was just in her nature to hunt mice, and it was also her job. That was one of the reasons the pastor let her sleep inside in the cold winter. And the other one was that she was good company. Fortunately for Chrismouse, Pastor Goodman knew just what was on Sally's mind. He picked her up and gave her a good talking to. "You're not to touch that mouse, Sally," he scolded her. "You've done enough damage already." Sally looked at him and purred, but in her secret cat mind, she decided to keep to her plan. And that night, the pastor slept in his bed, Sally slept on her stomach, and Chrismouse slept in the orange crate. But in the deepest, darkest hour of the night, Sally arose noiselessly and tiptoed over to the crate. She batted the cover away with her paw and swiped at the mouse. Luckily for Chrismouse, he had just woken up from a nightmare in which a cat was eating him. When he saw Sally, he knew the nightmare was about to come true, so he scampered out of the box and into the bed with the pastor. He made his way under the sheet and quilt and snuggled himself in the pastor's pajama pocket. For a while, he trembled uncontrollably and his little heart pounded in his furry chest. But then he fell into the rhythm of the pastor's breathing and snoring and fell fast asleep again. When Pastor Goodman woke up, he found the little mouse in his pajama pocket. He softly picked him up and said, "Now, how did you get here, little one?" Then he looked at Sally and the open orange crate, and he knew. While getting dressed, he kept Chrismouse safe in his pocket. And in less than a week, the pastor had become very fond of the little mouse with only half a tail. He kept him in his shirt pocket and talked to him as if he were a person. He read to him from the Bible and he sang hymns. Chrismouse perked up his ears when he heard the pastor singing, enjoying that sound. The next Sunday, during church service, his parishioners noticed that there was a movement in Pastor Goodman's front shirt pocket. Every now and then, a little mousy face emerged to look left and right, whiskers twitching, before going back down to the bottom of the pocket to hide. By this time, the pastor wasn't even aware that having a mouse in his pocket was an odd thing. He thought it was quite normal, but his parishioners disagreed. Behind his back, they laughed at him and said that he must be a lonely man and just a little bit crazy. But after a month or so, they became used to the little mouse in Pastor Goodman's pocket. So a year went by, and by the end of that year, Pastor Goodman lost Sally. She ran away with some handsome tomcat who lived on a farm down in the next valley. And now his only company was Chrismouse. Advent had started, and the pastor began to worry about the creche that everyone expected him to create on the church lawn. At one time, the church owned life-size plaster statues of the three wise men, of Joseph and Mary, and some lambs and goats and oxen. Unfortunately, Pastor Goodman couldn't remember where they were, or even if he still had them. He rummaged around the church storehouse, but all he could find was a small creche suitable for a table display only. He had no money to buy new ones, and the people of the villages were not wealthy either. And as often as not, they paid their pastor in cheese and butter and eggs and milk and berries. Oh, Pastor Goodman didn't mind. For him, a life of poverty was a good life. But he was worried about the creche. By this time, after almost a year of living in Pastor's pocket, Chrismouse knew his benefactor quite well. So he hatched a plan. He hadn't seen his family in nearly a year, but he felt very confident that they were still in a burrow just outside of the church walls. So one day he pulled himself out of the pastor's pocket, slid down his leg, and scurried through the hole he had slid through last winter. Chrismouse went to his burrow and found his mother and father and his sister still living at home. In mouse talk, he told them of his plan. They were so happy to see him and they agreed to the plan, even though they were not so sure about going into the church though. The second Sunday of Advent, the parishioners filed in for the service. And right by the entrance door, they saw a little creche. There were no plaster replicas of the Magi, but there were three little mice, each with a headdress on. Melchior had an orange peel, Casper a lemon peel, and Balthazar a potato peel. And that were, of course, Chrismouse's sisters. Mary had on a little blue cape that Chrismouse had fashioned from a blue rag he had found in the kitchen. Mary was Mother Mouse, and Joseph was Father Mouse. Chrismouse had found a page from an old hymnal and a toothpick and turned them into a shepherd's cloak and staff for him. In the tiny manger lay a little mouse with only half a tail. Chrismouse was the Christ child. The reaction of the parishioners was first repulsion at mice in the church, and then astonishment at the mousy creche. They all rushed to Pastor Goodman to ask how he convinced 6 mice to perform the nativity scene. Pastor Goodman said, "Well, I didn't." But no one believed him, of course. And eventually he just stopped telling the truth and said, "Oh, it wasn't easy, you know," and left it with that. For the next 4 years, and until every member of Chrismouse's family got old, the parishioners saw the mouse creche. Word spread from that first year, and hundreds of people from nearby farms and villages came to see it. They left offerings of food and money, and Pastor Goodman was very, very, very thankful. He didn't know how to thank all the people, and most of all, he didn't know how to thank Chrismouse. After all, how do you thank a mouse? With the money he collected, Pastor Goodman fixed the leaky church roof and bought himself a new little heater. He also bought a second-hand dollhouse that a nearby carpenter had made for his daughter, who was now grown and off to school in the city. He put the wooden dollhouse near the hole in the baseboard so that the mouse family could go in and out of their burrow and sit in the dollhouse whenever they pleased. And all of them did, except Chrismouse. He was content to stay in the pastor's pocket, his constant companion.